Hey everyone, my name's Madison. Thanks for checking out my channel. Today I'm going to talk about the best books that I have read because of BookTube. So I've been on BookTube for about 3 years, and that's also as long as I have been watching BookTube videos. I don't watch probably as regularly as I should, but I do love watching BookTube channels because I get great book recommendations. My favorite videos to watch are videos where people are doing reviews of books that they've loved or books that they've hated, because we all love that a little bit. But today, I'm going to talk about 10 books that I have loved, that I would never have read if BookTube hadn't made me do it. These books are not in any particular order, except that I did save the best for last. Okay, the first book that I read because of BookTube that I'm going to talk about today is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I loved this book, but I never would have picked it up on my own. I have a tough time reading classics and finishing them on my own. I tend to need a little bit more oomph or push to finish them. And Hannah Tay, she was doing a read-along for her book club, and I got to participate in it. She has a great little book club where you'll read it together, but then when you comment, after you're done reading, you comment in the video your thoughts about the book, and then she'll share them in her wrap-up video for that book. I loved this book. It was surprisingly funny. I didn't think that Victor Hugo was super funny. I've only started Les Mis, and because I just have a hard time getting through it. But this one was very amusing, although it was difficult to get through because he spends a lot of time talking about the architecture. If you would like to hear more about my thoughts on this book, I will link a video up above for you to check out. The second book I'm going to talk about, I don't actually have a copy of. I borrowed it from the library and never bought my own, which is a shame. But it's Circe. I read this, I believe, for the BookTube Prize in 2019, which is hosted by Robert at Barter Hordes. And this was my favorite book that I read because of the BookTube Prize. It is just a retelling of a myth by Madeline Miller. I absolutely loved it, and I thought that it is one of the better myth retellings that I have read, and it kept me engaged the entire time. The next book on my list I also read during the BookTube Prize. It was Fruit of the Drunken Tree. This one wasn't even on my radar, but it takes place in South America. It's about drug lords and things that are going on in South America, but it tells that story through the relationship of a wealthy family and the young woman, like the teenager who they have working in their home to watch their kids and clean their home. And it was fascinating, and it was very well written. I believe it was a debut, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I'm going to talk about that I read because of BookTube is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I also decided to read this because of Robert's channel. I loved this book. I wasn't going to read it because of all the hype surrounding it. I tend to not like hyped books because I feel like they tend to be a little overrated. This is not overrated. This is fantastic. It's the story of a small town in, Sweden? And this town just lives and breathes hockey, and you would not think that sounds terribly interesting, but it's not about hockey, or at least it's not only about hockey. It's about essentially what happens in a small town when the people that you put your hope in actually turn out to be despicable, and how the town handles that situation. It was wonderful, and I have started the sequel to this, but I haven't finished it yet. So I would definitely recommend this book, and basically anything by Frederick Bachman. He's amazing. The next book I'm going to talk about is Go Tell It on a Mountain by James Baldwin, and I was introduced to this book by Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. James Baldwin was essentially a civil rights activist. He has more than that, but that's probably what he's most famous for. He was a prolific author and speaker, and he was American, but later in his life he moved to France. This is the story of a boy who is coming to terms with his faith in New York City, and he's having to deal with segregation, and he's having to deal with segregation, but he's also having to deal with sin in his own family and sin in himself, and what all of that means, and whether or not he can take his faith seriously. It's about so much more than that, but this book was amazing. I am so thankful that I picked it up. I had never read anything by James Baldwin before, and I do intend to read more, hopefully later this year, but if not, you know, it's continuing to be something I'm interested in. The next book I'm going to talk about is Betsy Tasty and TB by Maud Hart Lovelace. I was introduced to this book by Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading, who is Jason's wife. She also has a BookTube channel, and she did a read-along 2 years ago? Last year? I can't remember. She did a read-along reading the Betsy Tasty and TB series, and I had never heard of it before. She said it was a children's book. If you liked Anne of Green Gables, this would be for you. So I picked it up, and I loved it. They are cute, well-told stories that also deal, and they're children's stories, but they also deal with pretty deep topics. So you get the nostalgia of childhood, but you also deal with things like a death in the family and little things that come up briefly. Like one of the main characters, she wants to be like an architect, but her dad says, no, that's a man's job. And so just little things like that, but those are just kind of woven in to a couple of beautiful childhood stories. I only read the first 2 in the series, but I'm sure you can go back and watch Kelly's videos on the other books in the series. The next book I'm going to talk about is another classic, Jane Eyre. I can't remember which booktuber inspired me to officially read this book, but I'm putting it up here because, as I've said before, I have a hard time with classics, and BookTube is one of the things that encourages me to finish classics, especially if there are read-alongs or book clubs. It gives me a feeling that, you know, I've committed to this. And it's not just me, I agreed with this other person that I would read this book, and so it helps me finish them. I did not think I would like Jane Eyre when I had started it in the past. It just does not compare to Wuthering Heights, even though everybody says it's better. I still don't agree, but it was so much better than I thought it would be, and it does have its dark, twisty moments, which I thoroughly enjoyed. The next book is The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. I was encouraged to read this book by Robert at Barter Hordes. It's a book about a man who, in a drunken stupor, decides to sell his wife and daughter to some town, and the results of that. They come back into contact with each other later on in life, and it's just a drama that intertwines those stories. And it was wonderful. Thomas Hardy's writing is captivating and deep, and I really enjoyed digging into the symbolism and what the story is trying to tell you. I would definitely recommend it, and I do hope to read more by Thomas Hardy eventually. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Again, I can't remember which booktuber inspired me to read this one. It was pretty popular for a while, and I think I probably watched reviews from several different booktubers before I decided to pick it up for myself. This is a book that takes place in Alaska, which I read while I was living in Alaska, and it was heart-wrenching and beautiful, just as beautiful as Alaska is. And a lot of people have discussed this book and said that the author just puts random heartbreaking things in there for no good reason. These things could never actually happen, but I mean, I'm here to tell you that they could actually happen, and they do routinely happen in Alaska because Alaska is a dangerous place to live. And so it's about a young girl whose father and mother drag her up to Alaska when she is in middle school, and they homestead, and it's about her life up there. Her father is a very troubled Vietnam vet, and it's about their family while they're up there, and the relationships they make with Alaskan people, what brings them back home. I would absolutely recommend it if you are interested in reading about Alaska, or if you just enjoy dramas. Is that how to describe this book? Maybe. It's wonderful. Read it. The last book I'm going to talk about is one of my new favorite books. I don't think I love it more than Harry Potter, but it's a definite possibility. And it is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I have a hard time with his last name because of that middle R there. I don't like to say it. Anyway, I was inspired to read this book by several people, Robert at Barter Hordes and Steve Donoghue. I think that Steve Donoghue did a read-along. And I specifically remember Robert saying that one of the characters in here was one of his favorite characters in literature, and I thought, well, that's interesting because it's probably a cowboy, because this is about cowboys. But I have walked away agreeing with Robert that Cal and Gus are two of the best characters in literature, and even though it's about cowboys, it's still one of the best books that I have ever read. There's this quote on the back of it that if you read only one Western novel in your life, read Lonesome Dove, which kind of gives the impression that this is only good as a Western, but that's not true. This is an epic story that really, I think he does an excellent job trying to represent what America is, especially at a time of expansion. The contradictions in that, the difficulties in that for moral people, and also it's about adventure. I read this book and I decided, well, yes, I do in fact want to be a cowboy, which was kind of something I always thought would be cool, but definitely if I could go back and be a cowboy, I would want to. Not a cowgirl, because the girls have a tough time in this book. Not because Larry McMurtry is sexist, but because it was actually a difficult time to be a woman. So, one of the best books I have ever read. It's one of my top favorites, and even though it's, I think, over 1,000 pages, nope, it's almost 1,000 pages long, I got to the end of this book and was so impressed that I wanted to start over right away. But I knew that that would not be reasonable, so I talked myself out of it and I read something else. But I do plan on rereading this summer. So, I want to say thank you to all of you wonderful booktubers who have inspired me to read these books, and I would love to know what books you have read because of your fellow booktubers. Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks guys, bye!